Mic check at 6:18. 6:18.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ms. Henry, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Sharma,
Here.
Mr. Strickland,
Here.
Dr. Wright,
Here.
Ms. Hogan,
Here.
Ms. Sonia. Present. Ms. Fowl,
Here.
Ms. Jones,
Here.
Ms. Cousins,
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First off is tonight's Spirit of Excellence. Tonight, the Spirit of Excellence spotlights the 20 SLPS schools named to the Alliance for a Healthier Generations 2022 list of America's healthiest schools. This includes 2 schools that are among 11 schools nationally that received the All-Star Award. This recognition celebrates 406 schools nationwide for achievements in advancing the physical, mental, and social emotional health of students, staff, and families. St. Louis Public School District has 20 schools named to the 2022 America's Healthiest Schools list. And I forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Ms. Layla, thank you.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin our approval of minutes, I did just want to acknowledge that yesterday, the Board of Education of the City of St. Louis announced that we have voted to appoint Dr. Nicole Williams as the interim superintendent beginning January 1st, 2023. Dr. Williams has over 30 years of educational experience in all levels of the education sphere, including being an interim superintendent previously, a superintendent, as well as a consultant to school boards, as well as school districts and superintendents. This process began about 4 weeks ago when the Board of Education opened up an application process internally to candidates who would meet the qualifications for a superintendent. There were 7 applicants and we interviewed all 7. It was really a very enriching process. I think Ms. Hogan said it best. She called it impactful for the board to meet with 7 school leaders who are incredibly talented and incredibly dedicated, and to some extent very brave to throw their hat into the ring and offer up their service to this district. Each and every one of them had significant talents, as well as, like I said, dedication and service to this district. And it was a really important process for us to go through. And we're thankful to all of those applicants, and very optimistic knowing the level and depth of talent that we have serving our children in this district. And back to Dr. Williams, part of this process for us was to help us understand what we were looking for in an interim superintendent, because it's not something that we hire every day. In fact, it's been over 14 years since there was an interim superintendent who now serves on this board. So through that process, we were able to sort of identify what we were looking for in an interim, sort of the baseline of to keep the lights on, keep the bills paid, but also to really start to set the stage for building on the foundation which Dr. Adams has set for us, so we can go on to the next superintendent to lead this district. And so through that process, Dr. Williams really sort of rose to the top based especially on her experience, her intelligence, her education. But we also have had the opportunity to see her work for the last year and a half that I've been on the board. She's been here a little bit longer. And the one thing I think that also that we have identified with her is her level of integrity and enthusiasm for the work that we've done. So we're approaching this process as we must, because we are elected officials. We represent all of the constituents of the city of St. Louis. And so we want to make sure that you understand and see our process as we're going forward. Part of that is that we are always open to criticism, as we should be. We're always open to input. And that's how we're trying to maintain this process. And so we always appreciate that. One thing, though, that I do think it's important to note, in this city and in this school district, the Board of Education and the school district is always at times being attacked unfairly. Knee-jerk reactions, people that do not have the best intentions for the school district. And that is something that we are not going to stand by and tolerate. So while we're open to criticism, we are not open to unfair attacks, and we will stand up and support our district and our students in the mission of maintaining public education in the city. And I am very confident knowing that the enthusiasm, the integrity, the intelligence, the experience of Dr. Williams, that we are in a very good situation to navigate the coming months while we go through some significant changes in the district. So once again, I want to congratulate Dr. Williams, and we look forward to some very exciting times in the future. Next, we have approval of the minutes. There are 2 minutes for approval, September 13th, 2022 and September 27th, 2022. If we could get a motion to approve those 2 sets of minutes.
Go ahead, Natalie.
I move that we accept the September 13th meeting minutes, as well as the tax levy meeting minutes from Tuesday, September 27th.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Henry, if you could call the roll.
Dr. Wright,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan,
Yes.
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Pfau,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins.
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
motion passed.
Good afternoon. A couple of comments before I ask that Mr. Dr. Smith come forward. We won't have a presentation from the foundation tonight, nor will we have a update financial presentation. That will be next month. Mrs. Banks is out ill today, and so I want to give her an opportunity to stand before you as opposed to a surrogate. A couple of comments. On Friday, September 30th, hundreds of A-grade students throughout the district converged on Harris Stowe University for the annual High School Here I Come pep rally. Students had the opportunity to get an in-depth look at each SLPS high school as they make the decision to determine if they will go to a magnet school or a neighborhood school. And so just want to thank the OIA Office of Innovation, Office of Institution Advancement for their work in terms of putting on that activity. The annual Elementary and Middle School Expo, which they manage as well, will take place this Thursday, October 13th, from 5:30 to 8 o'clock at the St. Louis Science Center at 5050 Oak Avenue. Families will have the opportunity to meet with the representatives from our schools, learn about the gifted program, and a presentation on that will be done tonight, as well as get the latest information about the upcoming magnet application season. Magnet Pool A opens next Monday, October the 17th. Lastly, on the first quarter parent-teacher conferences will begin next Monday, October 17th through Thursday, October the 20th. Please contact your school to schedule your conference. As a reminder, next Friday, October 21st, is a Teacher Professional Development Day, and there will be no school for students on that particular day. I'm sorry, that's this Friday on the 14th is the Professional Development Day. Next Friday on the 21st will not be school as a result of the parent-teacher conferences. Just one correction to that. At this point in time, I've asked Dr. Smith and Dr. Mitchell, who will come forward they will be doing an update on the gifted program. Dr. Mitchell is new in this role. She has a dual role in terms of managing the virtual school component as well as managing the gifted program.
All right, and so good evening, Board, Superintendent Adams, SOPS staff, families, and scholars. Once again, Dr. Marion Smith Jr., Deputy Superintendent of Academics. Before turning it over to our Interim Director of Virtual Learning and Gifted Education, I want to take 2 minutes just to recalibrate and recenter the bodies of work for the actual academic office. So we're focusing on 3 specific tasks this year. One is strengthening the instructional core, so that all of our scholars have access to the targeted resources and support so that they can achieve standards. We really focus on the instructional core being the combination between our teachers, the students, and the content. The second area in the academic office is how are we using multiple sources of data, qualitative, quantitative, perceptual data to be able to make informed decisions. And then lastly, how do we apply those best we know right now practices to really educate the whole child? And so what you'll hear is just one example from one of our departments as to how that's playing out specifically in a particular department and the implications for that work. And so I'll turn it over to Ms. Mitchell, our Interim Director of Virtual Learning and Gifted Education, and then I'll come back at the very end to talk about next steps regarding equity specifically.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good evening, the board. As Dr. Smith said, I am Natasha Mitchell, Interim Director of Virtual and Gifted Education. So, okay. All right, I'll just have a brief overview of our agenda. We're going to really have a high-level overview of what does gifted look like for this school year. I'm specifically looking at 10-year historical data. What is gifted at a glance for St. Louis Public? We're going to talk about some key changes really to impact equity and inclusion and anchor our work in equity. And we'll just have some updates on academics and pull out in the department. So as you take a look at this 10-year testing data, what you will notice is as we moved into the 2016-2017 school year, those are the years that we began universal screening. Universal screening is the most equitable approach to identifying underrepresented gifted learners. As we move into 2019-2020, what you'll see is those numbers declining because that was the beginning of the pandemic. This year, we will do universal screening for second grade, which I'll talk about a little bit in a few slides, but essentially, the idea is that the more we're able to test students and screen students, the more learners will be able to identify for gifted education and gifted participation. So right now, here's where we are as a district. According to the National Association for Gifted Children, approximately 6 to 10% of students in a population in the United States of America are gifted. And this exact moment in time in St. Louis Public Schools, 5.9% of our student population has been identified as what we label gifted eligible. And so that's 1,094 students out of 18,548. And that was our enrollment numbers as of last week. Let's go ahead. So why universal screening? This is our next step. And so we're making some key changes in this space. Number one, we're universal screening all of our second grade students. Research tells us that the best time to test is between second and third grade. Number one, because those are the ages in which we really are beginning to advocate for our education. also as a learner, test scores begin to really stabilize at that grade level. Additionally, in thinking about just education in general, the second to third grade switch, if we're going to do this massive approach to identifying gifted learners, that's really the grade we want to do it, right? The second to third grade bridge, especially to give our students opportunities. If they do so decide to go to one of the gifted schools, then they will have that second to third grade transition before they go into a school that will be doing full acceleration. The screener that we decided to use after a lot of research, this was not a decision made lightly, is the Naglieri. The reason we went with the Naglieri is because it is a nonverbal measure of general ability. So this is a nonverbal assessment. That means no matter what your background, no matter what your first language is, this particular screener is designed to essentially eliminate bias as much as possible, right, on any test. But that was really the reason that we chose this test. It requires no spoken or written language. And so that makes it really useful for non-English speakers. Additionally, it's kind of an ease of a test. It's 30 minutes. The previous test used was a COGAT, which was paper pencil. It took like an hour. It had to be manually scored. This is an online screener. It takes approximately 30 minutes. The other shift we're making in this process is that our psychological examiners, so the St. Louis Public Schools licensed psychological examiners, will be the ones administering this test. Previously, we had teachers administering the test, but that way we can ensure that we have kind of a normed process across the district. The tentative timeline for this is November 2nd to December 9th. So we have that time blocked off for the psychological examiners to be able to go to the schools and do this. And so essentially, students with a 90% or higher on the screener will be identified or recommended to take the cognitive and academic assessments. So the screening does not automatically identify you as eligible. It identifies you to be basically recommended for this additional assessments. And then I want to just really note in the district, if one of our students has a barrier or something like that to coming to this office to test, we will go to the school and test them if needed. All right. And so that's sort of the operational side, right? Like it's a guarantee and a right that every student in this city can get a gifted test. But when we think about, why are we doing this? We're leaning into the academic side of this. And so this is from DESE. It is, they just put it out. It's the portrait of a gifted learner. I think that's the new kind of idea, right? We're as a district developing what is the portrait of a graduate. And so as we look at our smaller departments, so what is the portrait of a gifted learner? And so as we move our work forward as an academic office, we will lean into this space. Okay. And key updates in our office, right, as we shift to these changes that we're making. One is this idea, as Dr. Smith talked about, we're strengthening the instructional core. And so if we're strengthening the instructional core, we're looking at that portrait of a gifted learner, and we're identifying what would that look like in a classroom? What are the look-fors in a gifted classroom or a pull-out group, right? And so beginning to delineate what that really truly looks like, and how we're planning to do that is this formation of this gifted leadership committee. We began meeting last May, and so this consists of academic office leaders, network superintendents, and then gifted school leaders to start to develop this idea around data collection. So again, the second part of the academic core is, right, multiple means of data. And so what we will develop is specific gifted look-fors. Again, leaning into that portrait of a gifted learner. What should instruction look like in a gifted classroom? What are the things that we should see? And this is, of course, aligned to not only the national standards for gifted instruction, but the Missouri gifted learner outcomes. There's some very specific learner outcomes that we should see in our classrooms. And what this year will do is we'll collect this baseline data. Right? We've had a whole pandemic, we've had some changes in the office, and we realized we can't make these key decisions without having data to inform our decisions. So that's really the purpose of that. Once we collect this baseline data as a committee, we will be able to design and implement gifted professional development for the 23-24 school year. Not that we won't be able to implement some of these new strategies this year, but really being super intentional about a needs assessment data collection aligned to standards, aligned to true gifted instruction. The other really, really important step we want to take is a development of a St. Louis Public School Gifted Advisory Council. This consists of parents, teachers, and community members. We have some true updates to make in the office. One is we need a new handbook, just period, right? And so we can make a new handbook here by ourselves, but it's more important to really get the voice of parents and community members of what the gifted handbook, which is essentially what does gifted instruction look like in this district. Gifted pullout and enrichment. So another key change that we made is a important step to follow the students. So the previous model was that we had specific sites kind of identify that, or this was a gifted pullout site, totally it totally depended on your zip code. And so that's essentially how it was originally framed based on these pullout teacher allocations. Now the 5 gifted pullout teachers actually reside in the academic office and follow the students, similar to like a SPED or an ELO model. And what that means is that we're able to provide gifted pullout services to every single gifted eligible student in this district that has chosen to stay at their neighborhood or a magnet school that's not identified as a gifted school, and they will still get these services. That was a key step that we felt like we needed to take. Not necessarily that this is a sustainable model, but really important for this year as we frame what does gifted instruction look like moving forward and what are our key next steps. And so another big, kind of push in the district was this idea of enrichment students. So at all of the schools that previously had gifted pullout, they had begun to develop enrichment pullout. And that meant students that had scored 90% or higher on a cognitive assessment. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the language, but that's one of the assessments, but perhaps didn't score 90% or higher on the secondary academic assessment. And so right now, in this moment in time, we're able to continue to provide enrichment services to those students. Additionally, a key just kind of update is students that are in 5th grade that are getting enrichment will need to come back and take that academic portion of the assessment as we open up this magnet application and think about placements for middle school. Okay. All right, so getting into really the why of some of these changes. The through line of today's presentation, at a micro and macro level is this idea of equity and equity coherence and looking at equity in the district. We're at 5.9%. We're right on the cuffs as being at the national average. But when we look at this at a larger scale, what does the equity index look like in our district? And so just to give you a little bit of background on this, basically this is based on a law, this equity index rule. So participation in the gifted programs by minorities should closely equal the proportion of the overall student population. When you apply an equity index rule, it gives you an allowance of about 20% for cultural differences or voluntary exclusion, right? So 20% one way or the other. And then, so when we're thinking about this equity index rule, we're thinking about like if a specific group had 40% of the population and adequate representation at a minimum level would be 32%. So just to kind of frame that, give you the context. Next. Here is the equity index for gifted right now in St. Louis Public. Right? So I'll kind of go down the columns, and the left column is our current, basically the current breakdown of race and ethnicity in the district. That's the percentage. Right? So the second column is, so for example, Asian 2.7%, the equity index minimum would be 2.2%, but their representation in gifted is 5.8. For our Black students, 77.4%, that's the representation in the population. Minimally, we should see in the gifted program, 61.92% of the students should be Black, however, 28.3%. I won't read all the charts to you, but we'll go down to white. 13% of our student population is white, while 63.9% of the gifted population is white. So The reason that this is important is it just speaks to where we need to go with the work and why we need to do practices like universally screening to really truly give every student in our district an opportunity. And so we're doing our due diligence to identify gifted learners across the district. And so we are super excited about the work moving forward. Again, we're anchoring all of the work in equity inclusion. And so that, again, this kind of speaks to the why of moving forward with the universal screening process, really anchoring the academic office work in gifted instruction and just moving forward. So, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Smith to talk about the work of the academic office around equity coherence.
And so as we said at the onset, we would have the why, the what, and the how of the academic office. And you would see an example of one department that's living this out in real action, right? And so I wanted to take a few minutes just to go over the next steps. As we think about equity, it's really anchored in what are the policies, the practices, the procedures, the systems and structures that we have in place that we're going to be modifying, addressing, and having conversations around so that we can really focus on this concept of equity for us. And so I want to highlight 4 specific things that are next steps for us, not only as a district, but spearheaded just through the work of the academic office around strengthening that instructional core, using multiple sources of data, and applying those best we know right now practices. And so the first next step is working with our equity committee to be able to convene a group so that we can draft a proposal for a new equity policy for the board to consider, right? And so it's all about making sure that the language from the board policy is up to date and current around the vision that you all have for this particular work. And so that particular committee is going to be reviewing historical data, number one. The second part of this is going to be reviewing examples of equity policies that have been board approved over the country over the last 5 to 10 years. And so looking at those board policies that are anchored just in diversity, equity, inclusion, those policies that are anchored specifically in racial equity, and those policies that are anchored in anti-racist practices. All 3 of those are very different, but we're going to do a deep dive in what does that look like, and then offer our best recommendation for what does that need to look like for our school district moving forward. The next step around this work is to conduct an equity audit in 3 particular areas: programmatic equity, teaching quality, and achievement equity. We began this work last year in our curriculum and instruction department, where they had a curriculum audit. And so they had an opportunity to look at the resources from all of our different content areas, and through their work with a research and evaluation group that informed their practices of how they selected textbooks and resources, right? And we'll continue to do that. The third next step for us is to continue in our year 2 of our targeted professional development around coaching for equity. We had about 100 of our school leaders and our central office staff members participate in year 1 of the work around coaching for equity with Elena Aguilar's work, coaching for teams, and coaching for emotions, right? And so how are we deepening our understanding around how to engage in these difficult conversations, these foundational conversations, to really push the envelope on what is needed to move the work forward? And then lastly, during our district leadership team meetings, we'll spend some time over the course of this year engaging in the work from Glenn Singleton. So you may or may not be familiar with the concept of courageous conversations, right, around equity work, and working with our district leaders and our school leaders so that by the end of school year 22-23, that all of our schools have an established equity team that follows a particular structure and process, so that we're poised for the start of school year 23-24, ideally with a board adopted policy around equity, with our district teams that have district equity teams in place. And we're moving forward with that targeted professional learning aligned to the equity audit. And so you saw one example in our Department of Gifted and Talented. We're going to be continuing this work throughout the entire school district, but we just wanted to give you a small slice of what that looks like in our Gifted and Talented. And so with that, we'll turn it over for any questions.
So just a couple of comments before we lead into it. In 1990, the board passed an equity policy, updated that policy in 1999. And so part of the conversation tonight is to lean into the conversation with the board about developing a new equity policy. The board is in the process of leveraging the School Board Association to revise policies. It is my hope and belief that as the board looks forward to the revision of those policies, that equity becomes a key component of the policies, and the board members, specifically anyone who's interested in leaning into the work that Dr. Williams is leading and Dr. Smith is leading as it relates to this equity policy. So part of the conversation tonight was to frame for you the gifted program and show you the deficits that exist there, and now frame what we need to do to address this from a district perspective, with the board leaning into this policy along with the transformation plan as well. So this was intentional tonight to frame the gifted program, and also intentional for the public and the board to understand that we want to move in this direction, and really asking the board's guidance and direction and support in moving in this direction. Questions that the board might have at this time?
Dr. Smith, I have a few questions. You know, I love questions. So who's doing the equity audit? And how long is that going to take?
And so that's to be determined. And
Okay.
so we began with an equity audit of our curriculum and instruction department. And so that was done through McCrell.
Okay. And so you're in the process of figuring that out. And then I have a question. You talked about multiple sources of data when we're looking at, I think you were talking about the gifted and talented program, like you're looking at multiple. Can you tell me about, when you say multiple sources of data, what you're speaking about?
Well, generally, it's looking at qualitative data, quantitative data, perceptual data. But when Ms. Mitchell talked about this, it's looking at how many students. We can look at gender, we can look at socioeconomic background, we're looking at race, like how many of those particular scholar groups are actually qualifying for and being identified for gifted and talented education. But we're also looking at some of those other factors over the last 10 years of how many of our scholars were identified, how many of them actually qualified, how many of them stayed with the programming. And then we're also looking at some of our outreach efforts as well. So like once they are in gifted and talented, they transition to middle school, they transition to high school. How are we creating like examples of affinity groups, like so that they can understand how to persevere in those particular courses?
Okay. Is there any way that we can get a chance to look at that data? I would love to see how the statistics break down in terms of the demographics that you're speaking of. I think that's really interesting, especially looking at who determines, I mean, not determines, but who ends up staying. And then how, I mean, the demographics in terms of race are jarring. And so while I know that this is a process in terms of getting more students, Black students into the gifted program, what does that look like? Is there a strategic plan for how we increase the Black students who are participating?
I would say initially, this is our first attempt at really having an intentional strategic approach to be able to address what this looks like and sounds like. And so more to come on that specifically. I can, defer to Ms. Mitchell because I know that she's leading in that space. But this is really uncovering historical trends, right? You saw the 10 years worth of data specifically. And so now how are we being intentional about addressing what we see and then being able to create those enabling conditions to move that work forward?
Okay. And then one final question, then I'll turn it over to everybody else to be able to talk. Sorry. I've done the coaching for equity with Aguilar. So tell me what that looks like. Are you guys just purchasing the books? Are they attending the training?
It's a combination of both of those. And so we actually had Elena Aguilar and her team facilitate the training virtually for the 100+ staff members. We also have the textbooks as well, or those resources. And then we'll be starting semester 2 of that, continuing that same process of those live sessions with the facilitators, and then just an opportunity to have follow-up sessions with the textbook resources, creating those cohort groups to move that work forward.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. How are we identifying the talented students? For example, you may have a talented singer, a gifted artist, but they wouldn't come up on the academic chart. They may not, but they're largely very talented in other areas.
I want to make sure that I understand that question correctly. And so
Say I'm a good singer. I'm headed for the opera.
And so, I'm a good singer. I graduated from a performing arts high school. And so there's a different way that you identify what that looks like and sounds like. So in the state, there's a definition for what gifted education looks like and sounds like. And so that's the focus of this particular conversation. I would say that other talents are recognized, but that's not something that we look at from our actual department of saying, like, you're talented in this area, you're talented in art, you're talented there. So that would be site specific, but that isn't a specific department that we lead in our particular space.
That's not
if that
included.
makes sense. If that makes sense.
That's not included.
That's not a part of the definition at the
Right,
state level
okay.
of gifted.
Okay.
Yes.
I also have a question. I know that you guys mentioned that you guys would be offering enrichment for those students who are not necessarily gifted, but still got above a 90% on one of the tests. I was wondering what exactly would that enrichment be? And would it be possible to offer it to all students, not just those that just got 90%? Because you are testing second graders, and I don't think it's too late to offer more resources to these young students.
I couldn't agree more, actually. And so to answer the first part of the question, what does it look like? Essentially, if there is a student that has been identified as enrichment, which is getting 90% or higher on the cognitive assessment, they would be pulled in a pull-out group with other gifted learners. And pull-out groups generally are rooted in a bit of acceleration, but mostly actually STEM and project-based learning. And so they would experience that same learning with those gifted pull-out students in the same actual group. Offering resources district-wide, absolutely. So this is not necessarily have to do with gifted, but we are trying to offer that same level of learning. One major initiative that we have implemented this year as a pilot is our robotics and computer science initiative. So leaning into that type of work for all learners, and the equity and that work is around that it has to happen at what's called tier 1 instruction, which means instruction for all, no exclusions in the robotics pilot this year. And so we hope to continue to expand that program, but we are truly looking at ways to provide 21st century learning opportunities for all students. So.
A follow-up question for those students who go to these pullout groups, since they're going to be missing class time, do you try to do it at the same time that they might have a STEM class, since they're going to be doing STEM things, or just to make sure that they're not behind on their classes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when a student is pulled, it's a concerted effort between the principal, the gifted pullout teacher, and the parent to make sure that this is in the absolute best interest of the student to have these pullout minutes. We work really hard to strategically schedule this time so the student's not missing core instruction around, math or science or something like that, because we want to make sure that this is added value and not something that they're missing. The other thing I should have noted is that while it might be STEM based or computer science based or math based, everything is really rooted in literacy. Lots of reading, writing, discussing, like I said, project based work. So yeah.
I have a question about the enrichment students. When did we start sort of delineating in a level of enrichment students that didn't pass both components of the test, or didn't achieve 90% on both components of the test?
I want to say that was in 2016, 17. That's around the year. I could get the exact year, but we allow students, when we changed the rules, if you will, we had the committee together, students who did 90% on one assessment and not the other, we start providing those students an opportunity with enrichment such that they can get into the gifted program and then retest again. So about 16, 17.
And so the decision about not to allow them to go to McKinley if they haven't gone back and done both components of the test.
Well, what we are saying is that they still need to sit for the test. We're not saying they won't be denied at this point in time, but they need to take the assessment. And so, and because of the pandemic 2 years ago, many were not even taking the assessment. So we are going to require that they take the assessment and then move from that point in time.
So will there be factors into it? So, for example, an enrichment student who's been at a full-time gifted instruction at Betty Wheeler or Mallinckrodt, and let's say they didn't do well, they didn't do the 90% on the academic portion, but they've been in that accelerated curriculum and they've had embedded tests with Savis, they've had STAR testing, they've had MAP testing, they've done academically as well as their peers and are prepared to go to McKinley. Will there be exceptions for them if they still don't get that 90% on the academic?
Short answer is yes.
Okay. And my other question, and maybe it's just more of a philosophical comment, and when Dr. Adams presented about this last time, I think we kind of brought up the same issue in terms of the numbers and the equity numbers. It seems like we are continuing to do the same thing over and over again with the same results. And so as part of what you're looking at with this is to change the way that we even do these assessments. Because if you look over the 10 years, we've actually gotten worse.
Yeah, so that's when we're even selecting assessments. So for example, the Naglieri, that was a very intentional. We don't have the data today, but Ms. Hogan, you asked a question around what are the key steps to approach this? And one set of data is around who comes into the office to test, right? What percentage of students are already enrolled in our schools? What is the like the socioeconomic background, the racial background. Additionally, we can look at what schools have teachers that are clearly like identifying gifted learners to come into test. And so we're able to glean a lot from that data. And the most important thing we glean from that data is universal screening for all. Every single second grade student in this district that has not already been identified as gifted eligible. And so we really are being strategic about that, because then we can make a secondary decision once we have this data in front of us to say, you know, out of 1,092 second graders, who was identified as being recommended for gifted testing based on this screener. Because truth be told, if we look at our equity index and we look at our historical data of who's coming to test, right, we have to ask the question of, is this a true representation of our population? So. And then,
So I think a short way to answer your question, Mr. Davis, from my perspective is we're doing two things differently. Number one, we are using a different assessment, which is key, I think. It's really a key component. And secondly, we're trying to have a wider scope of testing students. And I know we did the test before, and you and I had this conversation of the screeners, but we were using a verbal test that was very difficult for students to align to. So this screener is critical and important. And the fact that they're looking at a different screener that doesn't require a second grade student or a first grade student sitting for an hour writing down stuff is significant, we believe, to what's going to happen moving forward. And that's why it was really important that they looked at this screen as opposed to what we've done in the past. But you're right. If we did all the screening and used the same assessment that we used before, the results would be the same.
And then there's one additional piece is that one of the big pieces of work that we're focusing on this year is really around the concept of the pedagogy of competence. And that's been a part of our targeted professional learning. It's the research from Yvette Jackson that talks about, do we all, do we all believe that all of our scholars can learn at high levels, right? And so what are we doing in that particular space to provide a shift of the way that all of our teachers and adults think about that? And so that goes to your point, Dr. Wright, like, how do we recognize talent? How do we recognize all of that? It's first just understanding that we have to think differently about the kids that are in front of us. So we put the system in place. There's a new screener. There's a new process that we're doing. But secondly, it's all about, do I truly believe that everyone that's in front of us has this potential to be able to excel at high levels? And so that's a part of the thread or just the foundation of the professional learning that we're provided. Is that going to shift overnight? And so I'm looking at individuals who've been a part of the school district for quite some time. You know, I've been here in this role 1 year and 2.5 months, right? So shifting mindsets, it's difficult, but we know that we're starting in that process of having those critical conversations around what does this need to look like and sound like so that we do create those enabling conditions for our scholars to be successful.
Well, and Dr. Smith, I'm glad you mentioned that, because every time we have this conversation in public, I like to give the caveat that whether you're labeled gifted or not, our schools provide opportunities for kids. They're loving places. Our neighborhood schools are wonderful, whether you're in that program or not, and your child has the opportunity to succeed and will be supported in that. And I think that's important to know. So this 5 or 6% of students who are getting these other services, it's not like if you're in the rest, you're being left behind. You certainly aren't.
I have another clarifying question. I just wanted to make sure I understood this right. Are all the second graders, do they have to come to the SLPS building to get tested, or you're going to do mass testing at the schools?
No, we're going to test in the classroom. St. Louis Public School licensed psychological examiner will administer the test with the teacher in the classroom. And so that is a little bit different than before. I think it was like a gifted pullout teacher that did it. So yeah, they will come. We will create a schedule. I can't remember the exact dates, but we have kind of like a month blocked off to do that, kind of in line with the magnet school applications opening and things like that. And so, yeah, we will come to the school. When they would come to the office is if they were On the screener, if they were identified at 90% or higher to be recommended, they can come into the office to get the actual cognitive and academic assessments. Or if there is a barrier, we want to be really clear that we will come to the school and test there as well.
Have you guys made families aware that this will be happening in the?
Not before presenting it to the board.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, please. I'm so glad that you're making a change in the way that we look at the gifted program. I can remember when I did have students back in the day. I had two that were in the gifted program, and then I have one grandchild that was testing, and she didn't quite test the way that we wanted her to. But to me, when the African-American children are going into the gifted program, I'm wondering what kind of language the tests have that the students are not understanding, because many of the students that I know that I would consider very gifted have photographic memories and things like that, don't test into the gifted program. And what I'm really looking forward to is a change perhaps in the way that we treat our preschoolers, our first graders and second graders, so that we can use the data that you're going to collect to make sure that they're going to have high scores when they do finally test in the second grade. So I'm just real concerned. I know we all have different styles of learning, and I'm just really hoping that we will have more pullouts in our various schools, rather than just having a gifted program like at McKinley. I utilized that one as well, but there were so many students within our school district that miss out, especially when you say, well, you're in the gifted program. How do the other kids feel when they know they're saying, oh, he's so smart, he's in the gifted program, and I'm not that smart. So I'm hoping we can maybe call it something else as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Ms. Sonia, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm happy to see the changes as well. I feel like I saw this myself all the time when I was in school. Like whenever I would be in, regular classes, it would be much more African-American students. And then when I would get to the AP honors classes, it would be a much smaller list, like less than 10%. And then I think one of the first things that caught my attention after joining the board was that even in a 80% Black district, these are the kinds of numbers. So I just wanted to say, I'm glad you guys are considering and approaches. And I know you talked about the work of changing mindsets, but I also think what I see here is honestly systematic racism in this data. And I know that that's not easy to change and easy to challenge for any organization or institution, but this is one of the clearest examples I've ever seen since being here. So I look forward to us making progress on it. And I think that it's super important. And I will also lift up what I think Dr. Wright was maybe saying earlier, and also Ms. Jones, is that however we can use these tests, I think one of the things I see all the time in schools is because kids have different learning styles. And I know Dr. Wright said if I can sing or rap, but to me, that's kind of learning styles in the education system. So whenever we're choosing tests, if we can choose tests that accommodate and will identify students, even if they do have a different learning style or a different type of approach, I think that type of variety could be very helpful as well.
Thank you. I totally agree.
Thank you, board. Thank you.
So I just wanted to follow up on what Dr. Adams said with the equity policy. I'm curious how that will work with how the MSBA and the governance committee is moving forward. And I think we've put this out there before that we are looking to include educators and our teachers who are on the ground as we work to form these policies. So we absolutely applaud your work. And as chair of the governance committee, please reach out if you want to be part of that whole process, as we're going to be looking at every policy. As Dr. Adams said, some have not been reviewed since 1999 or earlier. And if we can put an equity focus on that based on the equity policy that you're putting into place, please reach out and please join us in that work. And it's going to be starting in January.
No, thank you for that invitation. We will do.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Good evening again to the public and the board. At the last meeting, I didn't get an opportunity to give the board a back to school update, and the last time was in August. And so I will quickly walk through the document with some data points that I think are important to the public and also important to the board. First and foremost, human resources, operations, student support services, technology, enrollment are the data pieces that I will talk to today. The number of new teachers that we have hired this school year is 180. I think at the last 190. I think at the last update it was about 180. So that's the total hires. The numbers before for resignations were 32. That number is 35, and this is as of September 30th. This data, and the number of teachers who retired, the number has gone up by 1, and that total number is 39 compared to 35 previously. School-based vacancies, the numbers are down from 100 and the next slide, I'm sorry, 137, I think at the last meeting to 76. How was that accomplished? It was accomplished by looking at creating ILFs. Those are persons who were working towards certification and treating them like certified teachers with the idea that they were in a program, and our building level teachers as well, but by providing them with the incentives that we put in place with their salary incentives, in addition to the fact that they are getting insurance benefits as well, but they're treated as teachers as we're looking to train them and keep them in the profession. So that number is about 76. And lastly, because the population is down, meaning the enrollment is down somewhat as well, things that we thought were vacancies, meaning that you had openings at a school, classes were able to be consolidated, i.e. The gifted program at one of our gifted schools, 2 teachers were pulled out to act as enrichment teachers who are going around providing support to teachers, the students in those schools. And so those are some of the kinds of things that help reduce the numbers. Won't spend any time here. These are just data numbers relative to the food service meal rates and the perspectives of what we think will happen over the course of the year. Transportation. Obviously, the numbers for transportation when I did this presentation before we expected about 145 routes to be run. The numbers right now 104, at least it were 104. The numbers of special education routes, last time we put 51, that number is 72, and the total number of buses 176. As of the 17th, we will have 20 additional routes running, and that number will push us up to 189 total buses and 145 regular routes. The hope and belief is that by the end of the month, that all students who are in the 6 schools that are presently being provided bus tokens as well as gas cards will be covered. We have made a dent in it, and as they continue to hire staff, the numbers of drivers that we expect to have by the end of the month will be something around 220, which will put us in a position that we will not be needing to use the bus passes and the bus tokens. But right now that number is 176, and the number as of the 17th will be 189. In terms of on-time performance, and the board is aware that we changed some times from the 3rd tier route such that the high schools are now getting out earlier, at least not the 3rd tier, but the 1st tier. They're getting out at 1:57 as opposed to 2:07. We did that such that we could accommodate the ability for buses to go from the 1st tier to the 2nd tier and from the 2nd tier to the 3rd tier. And even with that, you see that we're at a 90% on-time performance for buses. It's gone from about 20% on the first week of school, a low, to about a high of 90. Once we get all the buses running, we should be back to what we were previously, which is around 93%. We do still have some buses that are as late as 20 to 30 minutes late in terms of picking up students. We are accommodating them by making sure that we have services for those students prior to the buses coming. But for this to work perfectly, we will need more routes run by bus drivers, and we well on our way to try to address that. I won't spend much time here other than on the transportation call center, basically seeing that we had some 20,000 calls this year. You can see what that compares to over the last 6 years. Obviously, the last 2 pandemic years, we were not running buses. And so therefore, the numbers are extremely low for 2020 and 2019. But historically, we are around 3,000, around 20, about 2,000. But last year, 2,300 calls we took from the call center. And you can see what the reasons were for that. And part of it, as you know, is because we didn't have buses. The Family Community Specialist also ran a call center as well. We ran that for 20 days, and the numbers were around 5,800 calls that came in. That's in addition to the call center that the transportation company managed themselves. We also had a call center where you're sitting right now. We had a family community specialist here managing calls up until the September the 9th. Just some really brief updates around student support services. We still are managing before and after school enrollment as of September the 9th, when this report was pulled. For morning, we are accommodating some 919 students. And for afternoon, some 2,000 students is what we are looking to accommodate in before care and after care in those two programs. Social workers are fully filled at this point in time. Family community specialists, we have 7 vacancies. Nurses, we have 9, 5 are in onboarding. When I started the school year, we had fully staffed schools with 100% nurses in place. But since that time, some nurses have resigned. And so we have, at this point in time, 9 vacancies, and they are being doubled up, and we are having some onboarding taking place now. A medical, dental, and vision screening is taking place with all students are going through a medical, dental, and vision screening the first 2 or 3 months of school, but every student will have an opportunity for that to take place. Network meetings, student support teams provide updates to all network superintendents. And right now we have a mobile mart that's feeding 500 families monthly. In terms of enrollment, before we get to enrollment, let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry, technology. And so at this point in time, we have 350 iPads not returned from last year. At the time I gave you an update in August, that number was 707. And so we were at a 93% return rate. That number now is 97.1. The numbers from last year are still consistent to what they were before. In terms of laptops, we had some 3,006 that were not returned last school year. The beginning of this school year. That number is down to 2622, and the return rate previously was 82.9. The return rate now is 87.9. We're continuing to go after families to get these as we work through the process of having families return iPads and laptops. As you know, we lock them after a certain time, so they can't be used, and we don't provide laptops, at least for take home for students who have not returned them. We allow them to use them in class. Lastly, enrollment. I won't necessarily walk through this at this point in time to give you 10,578 elementary students. That's an increase of 324 from the previous year. In terms of middle school numbers, the numbers are 2,689. That's 287 less than what we had last year at the September count. That's the last Wednesday, September. High school enrollment down 136 compared to 5,027 last school year at the last Wednesday in September. 4,891 at this point in time, at least September, the last Wednesday, September, 136. And in terms of alternative enrollment, those will be admin programs as well as our alternative programs, down 49 students compared to what it was last year this time. Total enrollment decline, put this on another slide, 18,604 last year compared to 18,324 at this point in time. That gives you an idea of data that we use to make decisions and data relevant to last school year. I'll take any questions that the board might have relative to any of the slides that are presented. You've seen this before because it was sent to you last month and it was sent to you earlier again.
Dr. Adams, and this may be a question for Dr. Brown. I was looking at for the social worker for the assessments that we've done 109 suicidal ideation assessments. Where are we in terms of last year's data? Is that a similar number or even pre-pandemic?
I'll have Dr. Brown.
Okay.
So we do the numbers by semester, but I can make sure I can break those down by month and get those to you.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question. It's not a fun topic, but about transportation. How is it that parents and students can become more aware if their child has a bus? Because a lot of times students aren't aware that they have buses now. I was actually counting the buses and the students that came this morning, and my school had about 10 buses, and we had either as many as 5 or as many as maybe 10 students to come. And honestly, parents and students have become comfortable with the gas cards now, and they probably prefer the gas cards more than riding a bus now. But how is it that they can become more aware so that they know, okay, buses are provided?
So the gas costs are gonna be cut off Friday. And so I think that awareness will obviously, for those schools that have buses, the gas costs will be cut off Friday, but we sent out a manifest that the principals receive that lays out what time the bus is going to pick up a kid, what time it's going to drop off a kid, and where they will be picked up. And so that will goes out every Wednesday. And so tomorrow your principal will get it. But as you indicated before, families have gotten comfortable with not necessarily using the buses, but once the gas cards stop at the end of this week, because it will be 6 weeks that we've done this, there'll be some exceptions because all kids don't have buses. That will obviously be the reason why some families look to lean into this. But quite frankly, Mr. Raquan, what has happened is families feel comfortable just dropping off the kid, irrespective of getting a gas card. They just feel much more comfortable dropping off kids and picking up kids, which we've seen, and attendance is higher, quite frankly, in these 6 schools than it was in the past, based on the data that we looked at. So really two answers to your questions. One, manifest goes out identifying the kids who will be on buses and where they'll be picked off and dropped off at, and also the gas costs will end as of Friday.
Dr. Adams, I have a question as well about transportation.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we went into this contract with this bus company, I understood that when you contract with someone, they are expected to provide a certain level of service. And so I don't know if they're going to prorate us according to the service they provided or didn't provide us. But I'm looking forward to us eventually transferring over to electric buses. I think we had a conversation about electric buses, and I wanted to know the status because so many of our students during the year have missed the opportunity to go on field trips. And to me, that's an essential part of your education, to have the opportunity to go out and visit various locations other than just sitting at school all day. So where are we at with that?
So in terms of electric buses, a grant has been submitted. We are not we are party to the bus company submitting the grant, and so we are aware that a grant has been submitted. We have not received any kind of notification yet in terms of approval or not approval to the federal government. And so once we get that information, we'll provide that to the board, but this is likely going to be next school year, not this school year, that any kind of approvals take place. In terms of field trips, we are requiring students to go on field trips. Many schools are using the ESSER funding to do that. And so the middle of the day should not be as problematic as the beginning of the day and the end of the day. Example, we have our student council coming here tomorrow. We delayed them coming during the month of September because we were trying to work out all of the details around transportation. But now transportation is in a much better position to allow kids to go on field trips as long as it's not the first beginning of the day or the end of the day. That's when it's problematic. So field trips can take place after 9 o'clock until about 1 o'clock. But if they're going to go on a field trip first thing in the morning, you're correct. There are not enough buses to pick them up early to drop them off. And in the middle of the day, we're finding that the bus company has the ability to accommodate schools that are looking to do field trips in the middle of the day, not so much in the beginning and the end of the day. So it's beginning to get better as it relates to field trips.
I think I'm trying to understand, once we place the grant, the school system will own the buses, the electric buses, right?
I don't know all the details at this point in time. The company, but there's a lot of details around. I could instead of me giving you a false answer, incorrect answer, I'll give you some data relative to it. The one page I sent to y'all kind of gave you some idea, but I'll give you an update in terms of who owns, who's responsible for what piece of it.
So we're not sure whether or not the grant that was submitted will have us owning the buses, SLPS owning.
We
the
presently
buses.
don't own any buses. It is my understanding that the grant was written in our behalf, which means we will have access to the buses for our use exclusively. That is my recollection of the grant. And I'll provide you an update in writing by the end of the week. That's my recollection relative to, because we don't own buses right now. We have to go through our vendor in terms of their ability to get the buses, and the buses are used exclusively for St. Louis Public Schools.
Thank you, but I just really am hoping in the future that we will own our own buses and develop a core transportation department within the district so that we can have something we can depend on.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
I just had a comment about the food service. I wanted to note that at least at my school, the grab and go carts have been very successful, as well as the smoothie program. So I hope we continue to do things like that in the schools that encourage students to eat the food. Thank you.
I'll make sure that Ms. Althea Centil gets that information. Thank you.
That concludes the presentations for tonight. The next item on the agenda is the October consent agenda. There are only 5 items. There are 2 new items. If there's nothing that anyone wants to take separately, although we normally take the new items, since there's so few, if we could just take them all at once.
I move that we accept the October consent agenda, item numbers 10, 11, 2201 through 10, 11, 2205.
Second.
Is there any discussion? No
I don't-
discussion?
I don't really have a discussion. I just want to make a comment and thank Dr. Adams for that $110,000 that is being allotted to provide the regalia for graduation for our high schools. I think it's an amazing boon to our students, and maybe they can spend that money doing other things, not having to worry about that, stress about it. That we're went to the graduations, there were kids that were trying to get part-time jobs, and just seeing that stress lifted. It's less than 0.5% of our budget, so it's absolutely worth it. So thank you for that.
Mrs. Henry, if you could call the roll.
Dr. Wright,
Yay.
Ms. Hogan.
Yes.
Ms. Tonier,
Yes.
Ms. Val,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins.
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next item is board member reports and committee reports. Do any members have a board member report or committee report? Ms. Fowl. Go ahead.
All right, mine's going to take a minute. There's a lot going on. So this morning, the Land Utilization Authority, which I am the appointee for St. Louis Public Schools, held a special session to discuss plans for LRA reform. I'm actually optimistic for once about the new team that's in place, with all 3 commissioners being fairly recently appointed and not involved in any of the previous corruption that has gone on, and also new leadership with Mr. Lance Knuckles and Mr. Neil Richardson. The LRA has now existed for over 50 years and has historically confiscated homes from primarily Black families and North Side families, effectively turning them into chronically vacant eyesores. We're the oldest land bank in the country, I learned this morning, and that's not something we should be proud of. Most cities in Missouri don't even have a land bank. So in an ideal world, we would have fairly assessed taxes that don't kick out elderly people from their homes, disabled people, and homeowners who are living in poverty. So I'm optimistic that the economic action plan that is being put into place is going to alleviate some of that. They're looking at being proactive. We talked a lot about underserved communities, and we do have to also recognize that underserved often means just overburdened. So we are extracting from an underclass and not giving back to them. So about 65% of all property taxes paid in St. Louis City go to fund St. Louis Public Schools. So it's critical that we are intentional about this, especially after having closed so many schools on the north side. Any property in the LRA inventory is not taxable, and that's currently approximately 11,000 parcels. So I think we're going to be able to move forward with an equitable and innovative approach to liquidating some of these properties in a way that at least I hope doesn't favor just developers and actually puts those homes back into the hands of the people who have been harmed most by decades of unjust policy rooted in systemic racism. Effective community engagement is the key to this working. There is a survey out right now on www.developstlouis.org/LRA survey, and that's spelled developstlewis.org. So it's live now, and encourage your neighbors to take the survey. Please take the survey yourself. If your neighbors do not have technology, please try to help them get access to that. I'm told there will be other means of community engagement, including maybe some paper surveys, maybe some availability of iPads or tablets at existing community events, but this is going to be a long-term but quick plan. We are looking to have something done by January, and I hope that everyone who is listening to this meeting, who is at this meeting, can engage in this process, because St. Louis Public Schools cannot survive if we don't have an engaged neighborhood and community thriving. So again, that is developstlouis.org/LRA survey. Please fill that out. Hold on one second. On October 1st, I, along with other board members, attended the St. Louis American Salute to Excellence in Education Awards, which honored many local educators, as well as Dr. Adams specifically. Thank you to everyone who came to that. And this past Friday, I had the incredible honor of performing on bass clarinet with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra's Extra Credit on Stage program that includes St. Louis Public Schools educators, educators from neighboring districts, other places in Missouri, and there were even some who came, I believe, from Houston and New Orleans to participate. So it's a program that is growing. It was an emotional experience for me. It was a poignant tribute to the teachers who are forming the foundation for tomorrow's musicians. I was really lucky to rehearse with and chat with some of our teachers, and some of them are in this room. Some of them are very shy and probably don't want to be mentioned, but I think they deserve a special shout out, and I wanted to say something about all of them if you don't mind. So let's see, piccolo and flute player Pam Herendine is in her second year as Roosevelt High School's band director. She says her musicians are working hard and they're extremely excited to perform at homecoming this year. Ms. Herendine also performs with the St. Louis Flute Society, Umsel Wind Ensemble, Alton Municipal Band, and the St. Louis Community College Concert Band and Orchestra, which she has also conducted. Trombonist Mr. William Jeffries of Ames VPA Elementary is not only a music instructor and SLPS graduate, but also performs with his jazz ensemble, Jazz Edge, who we all had the pleasure of hearing at the Salute to Excellence Education. He was on stage. Mr. Jeffries has been with the district for nearly 30 years and told me that in all his years with the district, he's never actually met a board member. So that was an interesting experience to rehearse in at Shaw. He's a bit spotlight shy, so he's probably going to email me telling me to shush. But French horn player Dr. Janine Zeta has been with SLPS for 23 years and is currently a network superintendent for elementary schools. She has played with community bands for over 20 years and performs with the Highland Municipal Band every summer. Prior to being administrator in SLPS, she directed bands at McKinley, Metro, Gateway, and Carlane. Flutist or flautist, Miss Carolyn Kremkowski, has been teaching with SLPS at Shaw Visual and Performing Arts Elementary for 16 years. She teaches band instruments, strings, and recorders, and her students have gone on to perform with the St. Louis Symphony, Quad State Strings Honors Orchestra, and the Fabulous Fox Theater, and even on national television when the WWE Monday Night Wrestling came to St. Louis. For the past month, she was kind enough to stay late and open her classroom for us to rehearse. Ms. Kremkowski gave me the full tour of her basement level classroom, which included water leakage along the wall and a hole in the floor of her storage closet with like raccoons or possums or something lived. And she said, we just don't go in there. Trombonist Miss Marquita Reef has been with SLPS for 26 years and not only teaches music at Metro High School, but was recently elected as president of the International Women's Breast Conference, where she focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And brass instruments, women are not that common, especially trombonists. So she is actually, I'd like to mention that she is mentoring a 38-member brass ensemble comprised entirely of women of color. So hats off to her. She founded the St. Louis Low Brass Collective and also teaches classical guitar, jazz history, and introductory piano. She is a master of acquiring things through non-traditional channels, donations to her school. But her classroom is currently in need of AC adapters for electric keyboards so that her students can practice at home. These are just the educators I met over the weekend. Miss Rachel Philippe and Miss Tara Haley also performed, although we didn't run into each other. And finally, Mr. Denham Browder, a current SLPS student, gave the opening remarks for the concert. He is an inspiring also, but an aspiring orchestra conductor who has become an accomplished performer of French horn, cello, and piano. And now basically just hangs out with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra and the conductor. They just see him as one of their own. So there are so many more teachers and students throughout SLPS who love and quite frankly need music in their schools. And as we move into the community engagement portion for the Prop S funds, I hope the board and community at large can see the need for some of that $160 million to go to these funds, to go toward investing in the infrastructure required to sustain or improve the music programs that keep so many of our students coming to school. For me personally, I probably wouldn't have shown up as many times as I had to if my band had not been first hour. I would go to band practice and then decide to stay for the rest of school. So I think that is a big draw for a lot of our students. And lastly, Ms. Donna Jones and myself will be traveling to Florida next week to present to the Council of Great City Schools, along with Ms. Cousins, to tell the story of how SLPS regained governance to an elected board. Ours is one of a few dozen presentations out of hundreds of submissions, and we have an interesting story to tell, and we should be proud. Thank you to the district staff who helped us with this presentation, to Dr. Adams as well for helping us write that story. So that's all. Thank you.
Did you mention, I think we had a principal at Hamilton School recognized. Is that right, Dr. Adams?
Yes, at the Salute to Excellence,
Yes.
Ms. Starlet Frenchie was one of their honored principals at Hamilton Elementary. So I'm glad you remembered that. She received an award. There was a very impressive video of her, and she had also a lot of supporters with her, at least 2 tables, I think, and lots of flowers too, which were well deserved. Other board member reports.
I had the chance as well to go to Salute to Excellence. It was a really great event. It was my first time, even though it was the 35th one. And I think it was just such great videos, and just to hear from the teachers and the educators, like how much they really actually care about education. And obviously we know that educators could never get as much acknowledgement and recognition as they deserve. And then also I had the chance to attend the Citywide Educational Planning's community meeting that had great attendance. CVPA also had students that gave a stellar performance, and you could totally see the awesome relationship they had with Dr. Shaheed while they were there. There were some great questions from community. There was a number of stakeholders who were all present. So I just wanted to acknowledge how great that meeting is, give Ms. Cousins her flowers for helping to put that together, and say that I'm really hopeful and optimistic for where we go. And hopefully as we move, we'll see more and more engagement from community and all of us.
The legislative committee will meet again next Thursday on the 20th. We will have a presentation from the St. Louis School Research Practice Collaborative, a group who will come and present some initial findings, or at least some initial perspective on their research regarding student mobility, which will support our legislative priority of supporting students in transition and homelessness in the district. And then my final report would be an update on the superintendent search. There is about 12 hours left to complete the survey, and that will close at 8 a.m. tomorrow. slpssupersearch.com. The next step in the process is a week from, it'll be next Monday. The board will meet to approve, to review those, the community engagement findings, and to approve a job description and brochure. And then we are continuing to move that process forward. So if there are no other board reports, we will turn to public comment. Mr. Monroe, you're up first.
First of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Nicole Williams. In today's paper, there's an article featuring SLPS names Williams interim superintendent. I want to congratulate you. And in this paper too, and it might have something to do with the job you have in hand, there's an article in the paper on the second page next to your article. And it spoke about the number of children who've been killed in our streets. I think they mentioned as of Sunday, 17 children have died by gunfire, and at least 73 others have been injured in shootings. I'm one that believes that right here, we have the solution for what's going on in our community, in our streets. We need to pay close attention to it. And it's ironic, it's on the second page of your notice. So it kind of gives you an idea of what you're to be confronted with. But I think we have a solution for what ails our community, and that's education, skills, and job training. And I do hope, I think recently the mayor appointed 2 members to this board, Dr. Wright and Ms. Hogan. Yes. And along with that information, there exists millions of dollars in the American Rescue Plans. And some of that money must be earmarked to help us save the crumbling, vacant public school buildings that are in our community. If I'm not mistaken, Donna, you're now on that committee. The property, is it, am I right? The vacant property. And Bill Monroe and Harriet Tubman has solicited the amount of 16.5 million of those funds that's sitting in the coffers of our administration. And I hope that they can make a decision expeditiously so we can begin the work of providing a refuge and a place for our children, especially our young Black boys, for education, jobs, and skill training. We have the solution right here. And lastly, I'm a candidate for the Board of Education, and I ask the community for your vote. Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. Mr. Clements. And just a reminder, because I failed to mention, there's please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Mr. Monroe has it down. He was at 250.
What was it, Matt? 250? Woo. I'll be a little less than that. Good evening. My name is Byron Clemens. I represent AFT St. Louis, Local 420, AFL-CIO. There are 2 things I want to talk about tonight. One is I'm really excited that I think we can all work together to open a trade high school. We have all our compadres and other unions who are with us on this one. We're really excited and looking forward to it. I just heard today from the president of Missouri AFL-CIO. He's on board to start having meetings and figuring this out. And because some of this money is available right now, we should move in an expeditious manner if we can. And some of this can start with soft skills, as you all know, but I'm excited to make this happen. And the other one is please give a stipend for our retirees. We know there was some legislation passed just a few years ago that makes it incredibly difficult to get a COLA. And this isn't so much for recent retirees, it's for the very, very elderly people who have not had any kind of cost of living adjustment made for decades. And they deserve the honor and dignity of getting a little help right now. One-time stipend is what we're asking for from the Board of Education. Thank you. I think I'm under 3 minutes.
Jamie Zink.
I think I got on a sign-up sheet, but I didn't touch it.
Okay.
So I'm good.
All right. You never know what you're signing up for.
Exactly.
Ms. Nevels McNeil.
So good evening, and I would like to first compliment Matt and Antoinette. I like the way that you're handling the board. I like the direction it's going into. And also I'd like to compliment you, Nicole. I've read your resume and I think you are an awesome person. So on November the 14th, at the Police Center, there will be 200 plus employees from the St. Louis Public School System. So we will be meeting there, and it would be very good if someone could come there and let them know that you care for us and that we care for you. Because when I talk to some of the teachers who have retired from 2016 down, they have a very pleasant, good feeling about the system. But those who've come up, they have a horrible feeling about the system. And that $1,000, that is not very much, as I said last time. And I want an answer because I asked you, I left my email address and I didn't see my answer. So I want to know when we're getting it. And so as I can tell them, because I will be telling them again, and that, that's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it just makes the confidence go down. And then the employees are sitting around and not doing their jobs because we don't feel like it. However, I do feel good, but I'm kind of like of age. So it's like, I'm thinking that you're in the right direction and you should keep going this way because I am watching. And thank you. That's all I have.
Rachel Fenner.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Fenner. I'm the reading specialist at Carlane Middle School. This is my 15th year in the district, mostly teaching middle or high school English. So I'm here today to voice a concern I've already shared in a letter with the board concerning the district's recent ban on sabbatical leave. Last school year, I decided I'd like to take sabbatical leave for the spring semester of this year to help me improve reading at Carlane. The timing would be perfect because I'd already be out for part of the second semester due to the birth of my son. And I was excited about returning next August, revitalized and armed with more skills and knowledge. I met with HR in April to determine if my plan would be feasible. I was assured that it would be. And so I planned my personal and professional life according to that information. You can imagine my surprise and frustration when that request was denied in August. The union met with HR on my behalf and was told that no sabbatical requests would be granted because of the teacher shortage. The fact that HR is effectively banning every SLPS employee from having sabbatical leave is deeply concerning for many reasons, but there's two I find most compelling. First, it's very short-sighted and it ultimately hurts kids. Sabbatical leave is offered to teachers who've worked at least 9 consecutive years in the district. It requires that a teacher takes courses and it mandates that teachers work an additional year after they complete their sabbatical leave. This is a benefit that was negotiated and bargained for by the union to provide long-term dedicated teachers a time of rest and professional development in order to avoid teacher burnout. By stripping employees of this benefit, HR is creating a situation where we're putting tired, burned out teachers in front of our students, or we're driving teachers away when they decide that they aren't being supported. Either way, it's the students who are being hurt. Second, it will hurt the district's need to attract and retain quality educators. The argument I heard against my own case is that they've denied the leave to others, so how is it fair for them to approve my request? Well, I would argue that it's unfair to deny a benefit that you claim to offer to all of your employees, to everyone, regardless of the situation, especially when the targets of that ban are your long-term dedicated teachers who've shown a commitment to the district. If HR continues to deny this benefit, more teachers will leave and will recruit fewer teachers. No teacher should feel as disregarded and devalued as I have in the past few months as we've tried to sort through this. I'm here to inform the public of the issue and implore the board to hold HR accountable for their short-sighted and unfair decision to ban sabbatical leave. Our students deserve to have the smartest, healthiest, and most dedicated teachers in our city. And I believe that allowing teachers sabbatical leave when they need and qualify it is an important step in putting the best possible educators in front of our children each day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That concludes public comment and that concludes our agenda. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Henry.
Ms. Sharma,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland, Dr. Wright,
Yes.
Ms. Hogan.
Yes.
Ms. Sonia.
Yes.
Ms. Fowle,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.